The training facility was supposed to be safe, a place where soldiers learned, not where they preyed on the weakest link. When three male recruits cornered Ivy Jenkins in the equipment room and decided to teach the weak female a lesson, they expected tears and submission. What they got instead was a masterclass in why you never ever put your hands on someone whose entire existence has been forged in violence. Some lessons are taught in classrooms, others are taught with broken bones and shattered egos. This is the story of three men who learned the hard way that rank doesn't matter when you're facing someone trained to kill. Ivy Jenkins was 26 years old and had been at Joint Base Lexington for exactly 4 months. The sprawling military training facility in rural Kentucky was home to approximately 3,000 personnel at any given time. A mix of new recruits, specialized training units, and permanent staff who kept the massive operation running smoothly. Ivy worked in logistics coordination, a position that involved managing equipment distribution, maintaining inventory systems, and ensuring that training operations had what they needed when they needed it. It was administrative work with a military flavor, spreadsheets instead of combat, requisition forms instead of operations orders. On paper, it looked like she'd never seen real action. Her service record showed 4 years of unremarkable duty, mostly in support roles, with an honorable discharge that came with standard benefits and no particular distinction. She transitioned to civilian contract work at Joint Base Lexington, taking a position that required military experience but didn't demand the intensity of active service. The other personnel treated her accordingly. She was the quiet logistics coordinator who processed their equipment requests and maintained the training schedules. She was furniture, background noise, someone who existed to make sure the real soldiers had what they needed to do their real jobs, which was exactly how she wanted it. The training facility operated on a strict schedule. Morning physical training at 0600 hours, classroom instruction from 800 to 1200, practical exercises in the afternoon, evening maintenance and preparation for the next day's operations. Everything ran with military precision, because that was the only way to train thousands of soldiers efficiently. Ivy's work kept her mostly in the administrative buildings and equipment storage areas. She rarely interacted with the training operations directly, though she could hear them. The crack of rifle fire from the ranges, the shouts of drill instructors, the rumble of vehicles moving through obstacle courses. Today was Wednesday, which meant the Advanced Combat Training Unit was running close-quarters battle drills in Building 7. Ivy had approved their equipment requisition that morning: training weapons, protective gear, simulation ammunition, and various props for creating realistic urban combat scenarios. She was in Equipment Storage Room 3, conducting an inventory count of protective vests, when she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple people, moving with the heavy bootfalls of soldiers in full gear. She didn't look up from her tablet, assuming they were here to retrieve equipment for afternoon training. "You're Ivy Jenkins, right?" The voice was male, young, carrying an edge of something that made her internal warning systems activate. "The logistics coordinator?" She looked up. 3 men in training fatigue stood in the doorway. All appeared to be in their early 20s. All carried themselves with the aggressive confidence of recruits who'd completed basic training but hadn't yet experienced actual combat. The one who'd spoken had sergeant stripes on his uniform, a non-commissioned officer who probably thought those stripes meant something in this context. "That's correct," Ivy replied, her voice neutral and professional. "Do you need equipment for training? We need to talk to you about our last requisition request." The sergeant stepped further into the room, and his 2 companions followed, fanning out slightly in a formation that might have been unconscious, but effectively blocked the doorway. "You denied it, said we didn't have proper authorization." Ivy remembered the request. They'd wanted additional training ammunition beyond their authorized allotment without the required signatures from their commanding officer. Standard procedure was to deny such requests until proper authorization was provided. "That's correct," she said, maintaining her professional tone. "Your request didn't have the required CO signature. Once you get that, I'll be happy to approve the requisition." See? That's the problem." The sergeant moved closer, entering her personal space in a way that was clearly intentional. We needed that ammunition for training today. Because you denied our request, our entire unit got reamed out by our instructor, made us look incompetent. I'm sorry your unit experienced difficulties, Ivy replied, her voice remaining calm even as her tactical awareness shifted into a higher gear. But regulations require proper authorization for ammunition requests above standard allotment. I don't have discretion to waive that requirement. Regulations, the sergeant smiled, but there was no humor in it. You know what I think? I think you denied our request because you've got some kind of power trip going. Little civilian contractor trying to feel important by making soldiers' lives difficult. The other two had moved to flank her position, boxing her in against the equipment shelves. It was a basic intimidation tactic, the kind of thing that worked on people who didn't understand tactical positioning. Ivy understood tactical positioning very well. I process all requisition requests according to established protocols, she said quietly. Your request didn't meet requirements. That's not personal. It's procedural. Everything's personal when you make us look bad in front of our instructor. The sergeant took another step forward, now less than 2 feet from her, using his height, he was probably 6 feet tall, to loom over her. Maybe someone needs to teach you about respecting soldiers who do the real work around here. Ivy's body language remained calm, but internally, every combat system she'd ever trained was activating, running threat assessments, calculating distances and angles, preparing responses for various escalation scenarios. I suggest you step back and leave this room, she said, her voice still quiet but carrying a new edge that anyone with actual combat experience would have recognized as a warning. This conversation is over. Or what? One of the flanking soldiers, a private who looked barely old enough to enlist, laughed. You gonna file a complaint? Tell the administration that some mean soldiers hurt your feelings. We just want to make sure you understand something, the sergeant continued, reaching out as if to poke her shoulder with his index finger. When we submit requests, you approve them. You don't get to... Ivy caught his extended finger before it made contact, her hand moving with speed that surprised all three men. She applied pressure to the specific joint that would cause maximum pain with minimum effort, forcing the sergeant's hand into an angle that made him gasp. I said step back, she repeated, her voice carrying absolute authority now. This is your last warning. The sergeant tried to pull his hand free, realized quickly that her grip was significantly stronger than it should be, and made the critical mistake of escalating. His other hand shot out to grab her throat, a move meant to intimidate and control. Ivy released his finger and moved. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds, but would be remembered by all three men for the rest of their military careers. She deflected the incoming hand with a sharp outward strike that redirected his momentum, simultaneously stepping forward inside his reach, where his size advantage became irrelevant. Her palm strike to his solar plexus drove the air from his lungs with surgical precision, not enough force to cause serious injury, but enough to completely compromise his ability to continue the attack. The sergeant staggered backward, gasping, and his two companions reacted exactly as she'd predicted. The one on her left moved in to grab her arms. The one on her right went for a tackle, probably intending to take her to the ground, where their weight advantage would matter. Neither technique worked against someone with her training. The left soldier's grab met empty air as she pivoted, using his momentum against him with a simple hip throw that sent him crashing into a shelf of equipment. The right soldier's tackle encountered her knee driving upward into his midsection with precise force, followed by an elbow strike to his back as he doubled over that put him face first onto the concrete floor. 3 seconds. 3 men neutralized, using the absolute minimum force necessary to stop their attack. The sergeant had recovered enough breath to speak. You hit soldiers? You're finished?" Ivy stepped back, her posture returning to neutral, her breathing not even elevated. "I defended myself against 3 men who blocked my exit, invaded my personal space, and initiated physical contact after being told to leave. Everything after that was self-defense against assault." She gestured toward the corner of the room where a security camera had recorded the entire encounter. "And it's all on video, showing exactly who started this and how I responded with appropriate force. Now get out of this room before I decide to file assault charges against all 3 of you." The 3 men scrambled to their feet, various degrees of embarrassed, injured, and shocked, and retreated from the equipment room with considerably less confidence than they'd entered with. The sergeant shot her a look that was part anger, part confusion, part dawning realization that he'd just made a catastrophic error in judgment. After they left, Ivy stood alone in the equipment room, controlling the adrenaline surge that came after combat, even combat as brief and controlled as this had been. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But internally, she was processing the implications of what had just happened. She'd spent 4 months maintaining her cover as a quiet logistics coordinator with no particular combat capabilities. 4 months of being underestimated, overlooked, and treated as someone who existed to serve the needs of real soldiers. 4 months of successfully hiding the fact that before her official discharge, she'd spent 3 years with Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit most people knew as SEAL Team 6, and she'd just blown that cover because 3 idiots decided to teach her a lesson. Ivy pulled out her phone and made a call to a number she'd hoped never to use. "Commander Hayes," a voice answered after 2 rings. "Ma'am, it's Jenkins. We have a situation." 30 minutes later, Ivy sat in conference room B of the administration building, waiting for the situation to resolve itself one way or another. The video footage from the equipment room had already been reviewed by base security. The 3 men who'd confronted her were currently being questioned in separate rooms. And Commander Sarah Hayes, her former commanding officer and the person responsible for placing her at Joint Base Lexington, was on her way from whatever classified location she'd been working. The door opened. Captain Morrison, the base commander, entered along with his executive officer and the legal affairs representative. All 3 wore expressions that suggested they'd just watched something that didn't match their understanding of reality. "Ms. Jenkins," Morrison began, settling into a chair across from her. "I've reviewed the security footage from Equipment Storage 3. I've also pulled your personnel file, both the standard version and the classified version that apparently exists. But I wasn't cleared to see until about 20 minutes ago." Ivy remained silent, waiting. "Your official record shows 4 years of naval service in administrative and logistics roles, honorable discharge, transition to civilian contract work." Morrison paused. "The classified file tells a very different story. 3 years with DevGru, multiple overseas deployments, specialized training in close-quarters combat, advanced tactical operations, and various other skills that I'm apparently not cleared to know the full details of." "That's correct, sir." "So when 3 soldiers decided to intimidate you in an equipment room, they were actually confronting," Morrison consulted his tablet, "someone with confirmed experience in operations I can't even read about without additional clearance." "Yes, sir." Morrison rubbed his temples like someone developing a headache. "Miss Jenkins, help me understand something. If you have this background, why are you working as a logistics coordinator at a training facility?" "Because I wanted a quiet job where my biggest concern was processing requisition forms, not whether the building I was entering had explosives rigged to the entrance," Ivy replied, using almost the exact same explanation Emery Gray had given to Captain Morrison at Fort Mercer. "After 3 years of high-intensity operations, I wanted to find out what normal felt like." "And you thought you could maintain that cover indefinitely?" "I thought I could maintain it until someone forced me to respond to a physical threat, sir." Which is what happened today. The legal affairs representative, a major named Patterson, leaned forward. "Ms. Jenkins, legally speaking, you're completely in the clear. The video shows 3 soldiers blocking your exit, entering your personal space after being asked to leave, and one of them attempting to grab your throat. Your response was textbook self-defense using appropriate force. They can't file charges without admitting to assault." "However," Morrison continued, "there's the practical problem of what happens now. Word is going to spread. 3 soldiers got embarrassed by someone they thought was a civilian contractor. Your cover as someone without combat training is effectively compromised." "I understand, sir. The question is what we do about it." Morrison exchanged glances with his XO. Commander Hayes suggested one option. "She thinks you should be reassigned to a training role, using your actual expertise to teach close-quarters combat and defensive tactics. Your background would be valuable for training soldiers who might face similar situations. Ivy considered this carefully. Teaching would mean acknowledging her background, stepping into a visible role, becoming someone who was noticed and asked questions about their past. It was the opposite of the quiet anonymity she'd been cultivating. It was also, potentially, what she should have been doing all along. May I ask what the other options are, sir? You could transfer to a different facility where your background isn't known yet, start over with a new cover, or you could separate from the contract entirely, find civilian work that has nothing to do with the military. Morrison's expression suggested he didn't particularly like either alternative. But Commander Hayes made a compelling argument that someone with your skills shouldn't be processing requisition forms when you could be training the next generation of soldiers to defend themselves and others. Before Ivy could respond, the door opened and Commander Sarah Hayes entered. She was in her mid-40s, carried herself with the authority of someone who'd commanded special operations units, and looked at Ivy with an expression somewhere between exasperation and approval. "Captain Morrison, thank you for your time," Hayes said. "I need to speak with Miss Jenkins privately." Morrison and his staff departed, leaving Ivy alone with her former commanding officer. Hayes settled into a chair and studied her for a long moment. "3 recruits," Hayes said finally. "You couldn't avoid 3 recruits for 4 more months." "They initiated physical contact after being warned, ma'am. I responded with minimum necessary force." "I know. I watched the video. Textbook defense perfectly controlled, minimum force to neutralize the threat. You did everything right tactically." Hayes paused. "But politically, you just created a situation where we have to decide what to do with you." "I understand, ma'am." "Do you?" "Because I placed you here specifically to give you the quiet recovery time you requested after your last deployment. You wanted out of operations. You wanted normal. I got you this position so you could decompress and figure out what comes next." Hayes's voice carried frustration. "Now that's compromised because 3 idiots decided to corner you." Ivy remained silent. There wasn't much to say. "Here's the reality," Hayes continued. "Your cover at this facility is blown. By tomorrow, everyone will know that the quiet logistics coordinator took down 3 soldiers without breaking a sweat. Some will be impressed, others will be threatened, all of them will treat you differently. You can't go back to being invisible." "I know, ma'am. So we have options." Option 1. I transfer you to a different facility. Somewhere they don't know your background, you try again. Option 2, you leave contract work entirely, find something completely civilian with no military connection. Option 3. Hayes pulled out a folder and set it on the table. "You stop hiding and start teaching." Ivy looked at the folder without touching it. "Joint Base Lexington needs advanced combat instructors," Hayes explained. "Specifically, they need people who can teach close-quarters defense, tactical awareness, and how to respond when situations go from controlled to chaotic. You have 3 years of experience in exactly those situations. You could teach soldiers skills that might save their lives." "I left DevGroup because I wanted out of that world, ma'am." "I know, but teaching isn't the same as operating. You wouldn't be going on missions or conducting operations. You'd be passing on knowledge to people who need it." Hayes leaned back. "Look, I'm not going to order you to do this. You fulfilled your service obligation. What you do now is your choice. But I'm asking you to consider that maybe the best use of your experience isn't processing equipment requests. It's making sure the next generation of soldiers is better prepared than the last one." Ivy was quiet for a long moment, thinking about 3 years of operations that had left scars both visible and invisible. Thinking about the quiet 4 months she'd spent at Joint Base Lexington, processing requisition forms and pretending to be someone she wasn't. Thinking about 3 soldiers who'd tried to intimidate her and learned a lesson they probably needed to learn, just not the way they'd expected. "If I agree to teach," Ivy said slowly, "I need control over curriculum and training methods. No military bureaucrats telling me to soften things or make it more comfortable. Real training requires discomfort." Hayes smiled slightly. "Agreed. You'd have full authority over your program design." And I need guarantee that my past deployments stay classified. I'll teach techniques and tactics, but I don't discuss specific operations. That's already covered by your clearance level. And one more thing. Ivy met Hayes's eyes directly. Those 3 soldiers who confronted me today. I want them in my first class. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You want to train the men who assaulted you? I want to teach them properly what they tried to learn improperly. They need to understand that real strength isn't about intimidation or using physical advantages against people you think are weaker. They need to learn how to actually defend themselves and others, not just how to bully civilians. Ivy's voice was firm. If I'm going to teach, I'm teaching everyone, especially the ones who need it most. Hayes considered this, then nodded. I'll make it happen. They'll be in your first training session. She stood, extending her hand. Welcome to your new position, Instructor Jenkins. Try not to break too many of them. 2 weeks later, Ivy stood in Training Hall 6, watching as 30 soldiers filed in for the first session of Advanced Combat Defense Training. The curriculum she'd designed over the past 14 days was comprehensive, demanding, and based on real-world experience that most instructors could only theorize about. The 30 soldiers represented a mix of ranks and specializations. Some were combat troops preparing for deployment, others were support personnel who wanted better self-defense skills. A few were military police who needed advanced close-quarters training. And in the back row, looking considerably less confident than they'd been in the equipment room, were the 3 men who'd started this entire situation. Ivy waited until everyone was seated, then stepped to the center of the mat area that dominated the training hall. My name is Instructor Jenkins, she began, her voice carrying authority that made everyone pay attention. For the next 6 weeks, you're going to learn close-quarters combat defense, tactical awareness, and how to respond when situations escalate beyond your control. Some of what you learn will be uncomfortable. All of it will be practical. Questions? A hand went up, one of the combat troops in the front row. Instructor, what's your background? What qualifies you to teach advanced combat? Ivy had expected this question. I served 3 years with Naval Special Warfare conducting operations. I'm not authorized to discuss. I have practical experience in close-quarters combat across multiple theaters. That's all you need to know about my background. What you should care about is whether I can teach you skills that work under pressure. By the end of this course, you'll know the answer to that question. Another hand, this time from a military police sergeant. Will this training involve actual physical contact, or is it mostly theoretical? Both. We'll cover theory so you understand principles and decision-making. Then we'll apply those principles in controlled scenarios with full contact. You'll get hit. You'll learn to hit effectively. And you'll learn the difference between training and real combat. Ivy gestured to the mat area. Anyone not comfortable with physical training should leave now. No judgment, but this isn't for everyone. Nobody left. Good. Let's start with basics. Ivy moved to the center of the mat. Combat defense isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about understanding leverage, timing, and exploiting your opponent's mistakes. It's about staying calm when someone is trying to hurt you. And it's about knowing exactly how much force to use in different situations. She gestured to one of the soldiers in the front row, a large private who looked like he spent significant time in the weight room. You, come up here. The private joined her on the mat, looking slightly nervous. What's your name? Ivy asked. Private Richardson, instructor. Private Richardson, I want you to grab my wrist. Ivy extended her arm. Use a firm grip like you're trying to control my movement. Richardson hesitated, then gripped her wrist with obvious strength. Good. Now, you probably outweigh me by 60 pounds. You're stronger. If this becomes a strength competition, you win. Ivy's voice was calm, instructional. But combat isn't a strength competition. It's a technical competition. Watch. In one smooth motion, she rotated her wrist against his thumb, the weakest point of any grip, stepped into his space, and used his own grip as leverage to put him in a wrist lock that forced him to his knees. See? I didn't overpower him. I used technique against strength. She released him and helped him up. That's what this course teaches. How to survive and win against opponents who might be bigger, stronger, or more aggressive than you are. For the next hour, she walked them through basic principles, distance management, recognizing pre-attack indicators, using an attacker's momentum against them, targeting vulnerable points, escalation and de-escalation decisions. She demonstrated techniques, had them practice in pairs, and corrected form with the eye of someone who'd used these skills in situations where mistakes meant death. During a water break, she noticed the three men from the equipment room watching her with expressions that mixed respect, embarrassment, and dawning understanding of exactly how badly they'd miscalculated their confrontation with her. "Sergeant Davis," Ivy called out, using the sergeant's name from his uniform. "You and your two colleagues, front and center." The three men approached the mat with obvious reluctance, aware that everyone was now watching to see what would happen between the instructor and the soldiers who'd assaulted her. "2 weeks ago, you three decided to confront me in an equipment room," Ivy said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You blocked my exit, invaded my personal space, and one of you attempted to grab my throat. What happened after that was captured on security footage that I'm sure many of you have seen by now." The entire room was silent, watching. "You made several critical mistakes that day," Ivy continued. "First, you assumed someone's capability based on their appearance and position. Second, you used intimidation tactics instead of addressing your actual problem through proper channels. Third, you initiated physical contact without understanding the consequences." She paused. "Those mistakes nearly ended your military careers. They're also teaching opportunities, for you and for everyone here." She gestured to the mat. "Sergeant Davis, you're going to attack me the same way you did in the equipment room. We're going to break down exactly what went wrong and what you should have done differently." Davis looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he stepped onto the mat. The room watched with intense attention. "Come at me like you did before," Ivy instructed. "Try to grab my throat." Davis moved forward slowly, clearly not wanting to actually make contact. Ivy shook her head. "Properly. Like you meant it. I need to demonstrate to everyone here what happens in a real confrontation, not a hesitant training exercise." Davis set his jaw and moved with more commitment, his hand shooting out toward her throat with genuine speed and force. Ivy's response was the same as it had been in the equipment room. Deflection, palm strike to solar plexus, immediate neutralization, but this time she moved in slow motion, breaking down each component for the watching soldiers. "See how I redirected his hand rather than trying to block it directly? See how I stepped inside his reach where his size advantage doesn't matter? See how the palm strike targeted his breathing, compromising his ability to continue?" She helped Davis up, who was now breathing heavily but uninjured. "That's technical superiority over physical superiority." She spent the next 20 minutes using all three men as demonstration partners, showing the class exactly how and why her defensive responses had worked. She broke down body mechanics, explained targeting priorities, demonstrated the difference between defensive force and excessive force. By the end of the demonstration, the three men who'd assaulted her had inadvertently become teaching tools, their mistakes used to educate their peers about proper combat defense principles. "These three soldiers made errors in judgment," Ivy concluded, "but they're here to learn from those errors and become better. That's what this training's about, learning from mistakes, understanding principles, and developing skills that work under pressure. Everyone clear?" The room nodded, now looking at her with the kind of respect reserved for instructors who could not only teach, but demonstrate their teaching through actual capability. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Ivy taught morning and afternoon sessions, working soldiers through progressively more complex scenarios. She started with basic defensive techniques, then built to multiple attackers, weapons defense, confined space combat, and decision-making under pressure. Her teaching style was direct and uncompromising. She demonstrated techniques on anyone who volunteered, and on plenty who didn't, showing exactly how each movement worked and why. She put herself in disadvantaged positions to prove that technique could overcome strength and size. She created realistic scenarios that forced students to make split-second decisions about force escalation. And she never, ever mentioned her actual background beyond what was absolutely necessary. Sergeant Davis and his two colleagues became model students, probably motivated by a combination of embarrassment and genuine respect. They worked harder than anyone else, stayed after sessions to practice additional techniques, and asked detailed questions about application and effectiveness. During week 4, Ivy organized a full-contact tournament where students would apply their training against each other in controlled but realistic scenarios. Protective gear, supervised matches, and clear rules about prohibited targets, but otherwise, full intensity to see who'd actually internalized the training. Davis made it to the final round against a combat engineer who'd been taking the course seriously and showed real talent for technical fighting. The match lasted 4 minutes of intense back and forth before Davis finally secured a submission hold that Ivy had taught during week 2. After the tournament, Davis approached her during cleanup. "Instructor Jenkins," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to say, what we did in that equipment room, there's no excuse for it." "You're right, there isn't," Ivy replied, coiling training mats. I want you to know that this training, everything you've taught us, it's changed how I think about combat and self-defense. It's not about being tough or intimidating. It's about being skilled and controlled." Ivy paused in her work and looked at him directly. "Sergeant, you learned an important lesson the hard way. Most people don't get that opportunity. They make a mistake like yours and end up in real trouble with no chance to correct course. You got lucky that you assaulted someone who used minimum necessary force instead of maximum available force. Use that luck to be better." "I am, instructor. We all are." Davis hesitated. "For what it's worth, you're the best instructor I've ever had, and I'm sorry it took getting embarrassed for me to understand that." Ivy nodded acknowledgement and returned to her work. Some lessons came from classrooms. Others came from having your assumptions shattered by reality. Davis and his colleagues had received the latter, and they were better soldiers for it. By week 6, word about Ivy's training program had spread throughout Joint Base Lexington. Other units were requesting access to her sessions. Officers were asking about advanced courses. The training that was supposed to be a quiet alternative to her previous life was becoming anything but quiet. Commander Hayes visited during the final week to observe a training session. She watched from the observation area as Ivy worked a group of military police through confined space combat scenarios, her instructions precise and her demonstrations flawless. After the session ended, Hayes joined Ivy in the equipment room, a different one from where the confrontation had occurred 4 months earlier. "You're a natural instructor," Hayes observed. "Students respect you. Your techniques are sound, and you've managed to teach practical combat skills without compromising any classified information about your actual background." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm here because JSOC has been getting reports about your training program. They're impressed." Hayes pulled out a folder, always with the folders. "They want to know if you'd be interested in conducting specialized training for Tier 1 units, advanced close-quarters combat, updated techniques, lessons learned from recent operations. You'd be teaching operators at your level instead of recruits." Ivy took the folder, but didn't open it. "Is this an offer or an order, ma'am?" "It's an opportunity. You could continue here, teaching basic courses to soldiers who need fundamental skills. Or you could teach advanced courses to elite operators who need cutting-edge techniques. Your choice." Ivy thought about the past 6 weeks. Thought about 30 soldiers who'd started the course with basic skills and finished with genuine combat capability. Thought about 3 men who'd assaulted her and ended up becoming better soldiers because of the consequences. Thought about the fact that teaching, really teaching, not just processing requisition forms, had given her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since leaving active operations. "I'll do both," Ivy said finally. "I'll teach the basic courses here because regular soldiers need these skills, and I'll conduct specialized training for advanced units when scheduled. But I'm not leaving Joint Base Lexington permanently. This is where I'm needed most." Hayes smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." I'll coordinate with JSOC to schedule your advanced training sessions around your regular courses. She headed toward the door, then paused. You know, when I placed you here 4 months ago, I thought you needed time away from combat. Turns out what you actually needed was a different kind of combat, the kind fought in training halls instead of operational theaters. After Hayes left, Ivy remained in the equipment room, thinking about unexpected journeys and unplanned destinations. She'd come to Joint Base Lexington to hide from her past and process requisition forms in anonymity. Instead, 3 soldiers had forced her to confront who she really was, and that confrontation had led her to exactly where she was supposed to be. Some people taught because they couldn't do. Ivy taught because she'd done more than most people could imagine, and now she could pass on knowledge that might keep others alive when situations went bad. The next morning, she started preparing curriculum for her next basic course. 30 new students, most of them fresh from basic training, all of them thinking they understood combat because they'd completed obstacle courses and passed marksmanship qualifications. She'd teach them otherwise, patiently, professionally, and with the kind of technical precision that came from years of applying these skills in situations where mistakes had permanent consequences. And if any of them made the mistake of thinking the quiet instructor wasn't capable of backing up her teaching with demonstration, well, she had 6 weeks to correct that misunderstanding, just like she'd done for Sergeant Davis and his colleagues. Ivy Jenkins was 26 years old and no longer invisible. She was an instructor, a role model, and living proof that the most dangerous people often looked the least threatening right up until the moment you made the mistake of pushing them against a wall. Some lessons were taught gently. Others required broken assumptions and bruised egos. She was prepared to teach both kinds because that's what real instructors did. And every student who completed her course would carry those lessons for the rest of their military careers, along with a healthy respect for the quiet woman who'd proven that capability mattered far more than appearance. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage.